My boss laughed when I asked for a promotion and said, "Pretty girls don't need career advancement." I quietly gathered my things and left. 2 weeks later, he received an email from the CEO introducing the company's new majority shareholder, me. My family had been silently buying stock for months, waiting for the perfect moment. Pretty girls don't need career advancement. The words hung in the air like poison as Samuel Freeman's laughter echoed off the walls of his corner office. His eyes, cold and dismissive, looked me up and down as if I were merchandise rather than an employee who'd spent 3 years building his company's market share. That moment crystallized everything, the past, present, and what would happen next. But to understand why I quietly gathered my things and walked out that day, you need to know about my grandfather first. My name is Olivia Mitchell, and until 2 weeks ago, I was a senior marketing manager at Freeman Technologies. What Samuel didn't know was that I never needed that promotion. What I needed was for him to show his true colors one last time before I took back what belonged to my family. I was only 7 when I first noticed something was wrong with Grandpa Joe. He'd always been larger than life. The man who built computers in his garage before most people owned one, who spoke about innovation with a fire in his eyes that made you believe anything was possible. But that summer the fire was gone. "Livy," he said, his voice cracking as I climbed onto his lap during a family barbecue, "never trust a man who smiles while looking you in the eye and stabs you in the back." I didn't understand then. How could I? But I remembered how my father exchanged glances with my uncles, how my mother's hand trembled as she passed Grandpa another iced tea. Mitchell Freeman Technologies had been the culmination of my grandfather's life's work. "Equal partners," he told us countless times, his voice growing bitter with each retelling. Samuel and I were supposed to be equal partners. Their company had pioneered affordable home computing in the 80s, growing from a garage operation to a national brand. My grandfather was the technical genius, Samuel the business mind, until the day the partnership agreement was revised. The betrayal unfolded slowly. Legal documents with fine print. Clauses that activated only under specific conditions. A restructuring that gradually diluted my grandfather's ownership while he was busy developing their next breakthrough. By the time he realized what was happening, Samuel owned 95% of the company, and there was nothing legally we could do. I remember visiting Grandpa Joe in his study when I was 12. The once vibrant man who taught me to build circuit boards now spent hours staring at newspaper clippings about Freeman Technologies' success. "He didn't just steal my company, Livy," he whispered. "He stole my legacy." The day we buried him, I stood by his grave long after everyone had left. The rain soaked through my black dress as I made a promise I intended to keep. "I'll get it back, Grandpa. Everything he took from you." The journals appeared a month later. Mom found them while cleaning out his home office. 3 leather-bound books hidden behind a loose panel in his desk. Inside were detailed accounts of the early days of Mitchell Freeman, including the original partnership agreement that promised 50% ownership to each founder and their heirs, with provisions for future generations to have opportunities within the company. "He saved everything," my father said as we spread the documents across our dining room table. Contracts, memos, even handwritten notes from meetings where Samuel had made promises he never intended to keep. My grandfather had documented every step of Samuel's methodical betrayal. That night changed everything for us. What had been a vague family grievance crystallized into a mission. My father, a financial advisor, looked up from the papers, his expression hardening. "Freeman Technologies is publicly traded now. Smaller shareholders than in the past." My mother, always the practical one, was already doing calculations. If we pooled our resources, sold some assets, we could start buying stock, my uncle finished, quietly through different channels. I was 17 then, preparing for college. As my family discussed investment strategies and proxy votes, I made my own decision. "I'm changing my major to business," I announced. "And after I graduate, I'm going to work for him." The silence that fell over the table was heavy. My father was the first to understand. "You want to learn the company from the inside." I nodded. "Grandpa built that company. I want to understand exactly what was stolen from us before we take it back." The next 6 years were focused on a single goal. My business degree, MBA, and strategic internships were all chosen to build the perfect resume. Impressive enough to get hired at Freeman Technologies, but not so outstanding that I'd draw excessive attention. I changed my last name legally to my mother's maiden name, Walker. Samuel had never met my mother or me, but I couldn't risk him making the connection to Mitchell. While I studied, my family executed the first phase of our plan. Small stock purchases spread across different investment accounts and family members, never enough at once to trigger reporting requirements. Patience was our strategy. By the time I graduated with my MBA, we owned nearly 12% of Freeman Technologies. The day I accepted my entry-level position at the company, we celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. My father raised his glass in a toast to Joe Mitchell, whose legacy lives on through his granddaughter. My mother squeezed my hand. "Are you sure about this, Olivia? It could take years." I thought about my grandfather in his final days, a shell of the brilliant man he'd once been. I thought about the empire Samuel had built on stolen dreams. "We have time," I replied. "Samuel's not going anywhere, and neither am I until I own his desk." The next morning, I walked into Freeman Technologies headquarters for the first time, carrying my grandfather's watch in my pocket like a talisman. Looking up at the gleaming glass tower that should have had my family's name alongside Freeman's, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Samuel Freeman had no idea who I was. But he would. Oh, he would. The security guard handed me a visitor badge with a smile. "First day jitters?" he asked, noticing my white-knuckled grip on my portfolio. "That obvious, huh?" I managed a nervous laugh that wasn't entirely fake. Despite my years of preparation, walking into the lion's den felt surreal. My carefully crafted resume sat in my leather portfolio, the one Mom had given me as a graduation gift. I'd strategically built my credentials to be impressive enough to get through HR screening but not so outstanding that I'd attract executive attention. B+ average from a respectable but not elite business school. Solid internships at mid-tier companies. Good recommendations, but not glowing enough to make me a rising star. I needed to be forgettable enough to blend in, competent enough to advance gradually. The elevator climbed to the 14th floor, marketing department. My interview was with a middle manager named Karen Walsh. As the doors opened, I took a deep breath and stepped into what had once been part of my family's dream. "Olivia Walker?" Karen emerged from her office, extending a manicured hand. She was perhaps 40, with the practiced smile of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate politics. "Right on time. I like that." The interview was textbook. Questions about my experience, strengths, weaknesses. I gave answers that were solid but safe. When asked about my 5-year plan, I mentioned hopes of gradually working my way up through marketing, perhaps eventually to team lead. Ambitious enough to show motivation, modest enough not to threaten. "Why Freeman Technologies?" Karen asked, the standard question I'd prepared for most carefully. "Your consumer electronics division is redefining how families interact with technology," I replied, painfully aware of the irony. Those innovations had begun in my grandfather's notebooks. I want to be part of a company that's building the future. 2 days later, I received the offer. Marketing associate. Entry level. The salary was barely enough to cover my apartment rent and student loans, but money wasn't the point. I had my foot in the door. My first weeks were a crash course in humility. Despite my MBA, I was assigned to update spreadsheets, schedule meetings, and fetch coffee. I bit my tongue when junior executives took credit for my analysis. I smiled politely when older men called me sweetheart, and asked if I could take notes in meetings that had nothing to do with my job description. Each night I documented everything. The company's organizational structure. Decision-making patterns. Who held real power versus official titles. I memorized the employee directory, noting connections and alliances. My apartment walls became a hidden command center, charts and notes hidden behind innocuous art prints that I could flip up when family came over. Sunday dinners became our war room. My parents' dining table transformed from a place of casual family meals to the center of our operation once the dishes were cleared. "The Northeast Regional Director is leaving," I reported one evening, 3 months into my employment. "There's talk they might promote internally rather than bringing someone in." Uncle Dave, who'd leveraged his retirement fund to buy shares, studied the company organizational chart we'd created. "That could shuffle middle management. Any chance you could move up?" "Too soon," I replied. "But I've been helping Karen with the quarterly analytics. If I keep exceeding expectations without threatening her position, She might expand my responsibilities. Mom brought out a manila folder with our latest stock acquisition reports. We're up to 17% now. Your cousin Ryan's investment group made some significant purchases through their fund. Samuel suspects nothing? Dad asked, the concern evident in his voice. I shook my head. I'm nowhere near his radar. He doesn't even recognize junior executives' names, let alone a marketing associate who's been there less than 6 months. The truth was both frustrating and advantageous. Freeman Technologies had over 3,000 employees across 4 offices. Samuel Freeman operated in an executive bubble, surrounded by sycophants who shielded him from the daily operations of the company he'd stolen. By my 6th month, I'd built a small network of allies. Not friends exactly, but colleagues who respected my work ethic and competence. Lisa from accounting, who processed expense reports but also knew every financial detail that crossed her desk. Marcus in IT, who had access to internal communications. Jen, an administrative assistant to the VP of operations, who saw every strategic document that crossed her boss's desk. None of them knew my true identity or purpose. To them, I was just Olivia from marketing, helpful, reliable, and always willing to stay late to help with a project crunch. You wouldn't believe what happened in the executive meeting today, Jen confided over lunch one day. They're considering acquiring TechVision, but Samuel shut down the whole discussion because the CEO is a woman. Said she'd be too emotional during negotiations. I nodded sympathetically while filing the information away. TechVision would have been a smart acquisition. Their patents would complement Freeman's portfolio perfectly. My grandfather would have pushed for it. The toxic culture became more apparent the longer I stayed. I witnessed Samuel's nephew, fresh out of college, promoted to project manager over team members with years of experience. I saw talented women hit glass ceilings, watching men with half their qualifications climb past them. In executive presentations, women's ideas were ignored until a man repeated them. During my annual review, Karen seemed genuinely impressed with my performance. You've exceeded expectations in every category, Olivia. I'm recommending you for a junior analyst position. Thank you, I said, feeling a strange mix of pride and hollowness. The promotion was earned through genuine work, yet everything about my presence there was built on deception. That evening I called an emergency family meeting. We need to accelerate our timetable, I explained, spreading out my latest notes. Samuel's making strategic mistakes. The company's innovative edge is slipping. If we wait too long, what we're fighting for might not be worth having. My father studied the financial projections I'd compiled. We're at 24% ownership now. Another year, maybe less. I can get there, I insisted. I just need to keep climbing without drawing attention. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out my grandfather's watch from its hiding place. The ticking felt like a countdown. For the first time since starting at Freeman, doubt crept in. Was I compromising too much of myself in pursuit of justice? The mask I wore daily was becoming too comfortable. But then I remembered Samuel's casual cruelty, the way his decisions dishonored everything my grandfather had built. I remembered the promise I'd made at a rain-soaked gravesite. Tomorrow I would return to Freeman Technologies. I would smile at colleagues who didn't know my name. I would contribute ideas in meetings where my voice barely registered. I would watch and learn and plan. Samuel Freeman still had no idea who I was. But with every passing day I was one step closer to the moment when he would. The quarterly marketing presentation changed everything. Karen had fallen ill the night before, and in a panicked 6 a.m. phone call, she'd asked me to take her place. Just stick to the slides we prepared, she instructed, her voice raspy with fever. Don't try to improvise. I hung up and immediately pulled out the presentation we'd been working on for weeks. The data was solid, but the conclusions were safe, uninspired. This was my chance, risky but potentially worth it. By 9 a.m., I'd completely restructured the analysis, drawing on patterns I'd observed in consumer behavior reports that nobody else had connected. When I walked into the conference room, the marketing VP raised an eyebrow at seeing me instead of Karen, but gestured for me to begin. As you can see, I concluded 15 minutes later, pointing to my final slide, if we redirect 30% of our traditional advertising budget to targeted digital campaigns among the demographics I've highlighted, we could increase conversion rates by an estimated 18% while reducing overall marketing spend. The silence that followed was deafening. The VP leaned forward, removing his glasses. These aren't the projections Karen showed me yesterday. No, sir. I took the liberty of conducting additional analysis overnight. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. The data supported a different approach. 2 more executives peppered me with questions, which I answered with growing confidence. By the end of the meeting, the VP had approved my proposal as a pilot program for the next quarter. When Karen returned, she was initially furious that I deviated from the plan, then begrudgingly impressed when she learned the outcome. Bold move, Walker. Could have backfired spectacularly. Sometimes calculated risks pay off, I replied, thinking not just of the presentation but of our entire operation. The pilot program exceeded even my projections. Suddenly, I was being invited to strategy meetings beyond my pay grade. Senior directors began asking for the Walker analysis on their initiatives. I remained outwardly humble while seizing every opportunity to learn more about Freeman Technologies' operations, vulnerabilities, and untapped potential. My days became increasingly demanding, but the nights were even more intense. I'd return to my apartment after 10-hour workdays and spread financial reports across my kitchen table, studying the company's structure until my eyes burned. I memorized patent applications, market analyses, competitor strategies, information that not even most directors had fully synthesized. I discovered that while Freeman Technologies maintained a strong market position, it was coasting on innovations from years ago, many of which had originated with my grandfather. Samuel had systematically dismantled the R&D teams my grandfather had built, replacing innovation with incremental updates and aggressive marketing. The company's foundation was shakier than its glossy annual reports suggested. Every third Saturday, I'd drive 3 hours to my parents' lake house, the one place we knew was safe from curious colleagues or prying eyes. Uncle Dave had installed signal blockers to prevent electronic surveillance, perhaps an excessive precaution, but we couldn't risk exposure as our plan accelerated. We've acquired another 7% through Ryan's investment group, Dad reported during one such meeting 18 months into my employment. That puts us at 31%. The Rodriguez family's hedge fund is willing to sell their 4% stake, Mom added. But they're asking above market value. Pay it, I said firmly. Samuel just canceled 3 promising development projects to boost quarterly earnings. The stock will take a hit when the market realizes there's no innovation pipeline. My growing professional success came with personal costs I hadn't anticipated. Old friends stopped calling after too many canceled plans and vague explanations. A promising relationship with a law associate fizzled when I couldn't explain my constant unavailability and secretive phone calls. My apartment remained minimally furnished, unlived in, a place to sleep between workdays rather than a home. Some nights, exhaustion and isolation caught up with me. Staring at my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, tension permanently etched between my brows, I questioned whether justice for my grandfather was worth sacrificing my own life. One particularly low evening, I dialed my cousin Ryan, the only family member who had expressed reservations about our plan. "Liv," he said after I confessed my doubts, "your grandfather wouldn't want you to lose yourself in pursuing this vendetta. It's not just vengeance," I insisted. "It's about reclaiming what should have been ours, what should have been everyone's. Samuel has corrupted Grandpa's vision. And if you succeed, then what?" I had no answer. For so long the mission had been everything. I'd never considered life after revenge. Despite my private struggles, professionally I continued to shine. When Karen was promoted to senior director, she recommended me to take her place as marketing manager. The promotion came with a team of 6 direct reports, my own office, and access to strategic planning sessions one level below the executive team. On the day I moved into my new office, a silver-haired man paused in my doorway. I recognized Franklin Chin, the company's CFO, one of the few executives who'd been with the company since my grandfather's time, though they'd never been close. "You've made quite an impression," he said, studying me with curiosity. 2 years from associate to department manager is nearly unheard of here. "I'm passionate about the work," I replied carefully. He glanced at the framed analytics award on my wall. "You remind me of someone, one of our founders actually. Joe had that same intensity about getting the details right." My heart stuttered. Had he made the connection? I'll take that as a compliment. You should, he nodded. This company could use more of Joe's spirit. Before you, I thought it had been thoroughly erased. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me shaken. I hadn't expected anyone to see my grandfather in me, to remember him with such apparent respect. It complicated the narrative I'd constructed of a company that had completely forsaken its co-founder. That evening I stood at my apartment window, looking toward the gleaming Freeman Technologies tower downtown. I was no longer an invisible cog in the machine. With each promotion, my actions affected more people. Employees who trusted me, clients who believed in my strategies. The moral complexity of my mission was growing alongside my influence. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine not just taking control of the company, but what I might do with that power once I had it. Would I dismantle what Samuel had built out of spite? Or could I honor my grandfather by restoring his original vision? Samuel's office was just 2 floors above mine now. Soon I would be ready to request a director position that would place me on the executive team, directly in his path. The final phase of our plan was within reach. I touched my grandfather's watch, still keeping perfect time after all these years. We're almost there, Grandpa, I whispered. I just hope I'll still recognize myself when it's over. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of strategic planning sessions, team development, and carefully orchestrated successes. My marketing department consistently outperformed every other division, with innovations that doubled our customer engagement metrics. The executive floor had taken notice. The opportunity presented itself during the annual leadership conference at Lake Tahoe. I found myself seated next to Franklin Chin at the closing dinner, the CFO who had mentioned my resemblance to my grandfather. Your presentation on digital transformation was the highlight of the conference, he commented, swirling his wine. The board members were impressed. Thank you, I replied, keeping my voice measured despite my racing heart. I believe there's still untapped potential in our approach to customer experience. Franklin studied me thoughtfully. The Director of Strategic Marketing position opens next month. Barbara's retiring after 20 years. I've heard the rumors. You should apply, he said simply. I'd endorse your candidacy. The position would place me on the executive leadership team, with direct reporting to Samuel Freeman himself. After 3 years of careful maneuvering, the final door was opening. Back in New York, I spent weeks preparing my application and presentation. The family's stock ownership had reached 47% through various channels. Not quite a majority, but close enough that a few more strategic purchases would tip the balance. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The morning of my interview, Mom called. Are you ready for this, sweetheart? As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, adjusting my perfectly tailored navy suit in the mirror. 3 years of work comes down to today. Your grandfather would be so proud. Her voice caught. Whatever happens in that room, remember that. The executive floor was a different world from the rest of the building. Plush carpeting, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city. Samuel's assistant, a stern woman in her 50s, led me to the conference room where the selection committee would meet. Franklin nodded encouragingly as I set up my presentation. Beside him sat 2 board members, the VP of Operations and the head of Human Resources. Samuel himself entered last, barely glancing at me as he took his seat at the head of the table. Ms. Walker, he said, checking his watch. You have 15 minutes. I launched into my presentation with calm confidence, outlining my vision for the strategic marketing division, backed by data and case studies I'd meticulously assembled. I highlighted opportunities for innovation that would position Freeman Technologies ahead of emerging competitors. My voice never wavered, even as Samuel checked his phone repeatedly, displaying his indifference. When I finished, the board members asked insightful questions, which I answered with precision. Franklin's expression told me I'd exceeded even his expectations. For a brief moment, I felt genuine pride in my work, separate from my ulterior motives. Well, Samuel finally spoke, leaning back in his chair. That was certainly detailed. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I believe attention to detail is essential in strategic planning. He waved dismissively. The board will deliberate and make their decision next week. However, I'd like a private word with Ms. Walker. The rest of you can go. My pulse quickened as the room emptied. Franklin squeezed my shoulder supportively as he passed. a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Samuel. Once we were alone, Samuel studied me with cold calculation. You've made quite the impression on my executive team. 3 years and suddenly everyone's singing your praises. I've worked hard to contribute value to the company, sir. Indeed. He stood walking to the window. Tell me, Ms. Walker, why do you really want this position? I believe I can help guide the company's future, I answered truthfully if incompletely. He turned, his expression hardening. Let me be direct. I've reviewed your file. Your performance is undeniable, but this position requires someone who will be fully committed to the role for many years. Someone with gravitas. My record demonstrates my commitment. Your record shows ambition, he interrupted, which is admirable in its place. But executive leadership requires more than clever marketing strategies. My stomach tightened as I recognized the shift in his tone. I'd seen it before when he spoke to other female employees who'd gotten too close to the glass ceiling. Perhaps, he continued, his smile not reaching his eyes, you'd be better suited to heading our social media division. It's still a director title with a modest increase in compensation. The social media division was a corporate backwater, understaffed, underfunded, and largely ignored in strategic planning. It was where careers went to stagnate. May I ask why you feel the strategic marketing position wouldn't be suitable? I kept my voice professional despite the anger building inside me. He chuckled, walking closer. Let's just say it requires a certain presence. Long hours, high-pressure meetings with clients who expect a particular type of authority. My performance metrics exceed those of any other candidate, I stated firmly. That's when it happened. Samuel laughed. Not a genuine laugh of amusement, but the condescending chuckle of a man who believed himself untouchable. He looked me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. Ms. Walker, he said with a dismissive wave, pretty girls don't need career advancement. They need to recognize their natural advantages. Your looks open doors. Why burden yourself with executive responsibilities when you could coast on your appearance for years? The words hung in the air between us, the naked sexism so blatant it momentarily stunned me into silence. In that crystallizing moment, I saw my grandfather's betrayer fully exposed. Not just a thief of legacy, but a small, petty man who'd never deserved what he'd stolen. I also realized something else. We were ready. The family's ownership percentage plus the shares held by allies we'd cultivated over the years would be enough. It was time to end the charade. I understand, I said, gathering my presentation materials with steady hands that belied the fire in my veins. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Freeman. He seemed almost disappointed by my calm acceptance. The social media offer stands. Helen in HR will have the paperwork. That won't be necessary. I headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Freeman. Yes. My grandfather always said character reveals itself under pressure. He was right. I left him looking vaguely confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to place the significance of my words. Back at my office, I methodically packed my personal items into a cardboard box. My team watched in bewilderment as I emptied my desk drawers. Olivia, what happened? Lisa from accounting hovered in my doorway. Everyone thought you had that promotion locked down. Let's just say I received unexpected clarity about my future here, I replied, wrapping my awards in tissue paper. You're not leaving, are you? The genuine distress in her voice gave me pause. I'd made real connections here despite my ulterior motives. It's time for a change, I said, offering a smile that felt surprisingly authentic. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt properly. With my box tucked under my arm, I walked out of Freeman Technologies for what I knew would be the last time as an employee. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent the text I'd been waiting 3 years to send. Checkmate in position. Begin final phase. As I crossed the lobby, I caught my reflection in the polished marble walls, head high, shoulders back, my grandfather's determined expression mirrored in my own face. Samuel had made a fatal mistake. He'd shown me exactly who he was, just as I was about to show him exactly who I am. The Mitchell family war room was in full operation by the time I arrived at my parents' lake house that evening. Uncle Dave had set up multiple laptops on the dining table, each displaying different financial dashboards. My cousin Ryan paced near the windows, phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with his investment partners. Mom and Dad huddled with our family attorney, reviewing documents spread across the kitchen island. "There she is," Dad announced as I walked in, setting down my overnight bag. Everyone paused, turning to me with expressions ranging from concern to fierce determination. "Are you okay, honey?" Mom asked, crossing the room to embrace me. "Your text was pretty cryptic." "I'm fine," I assured her, though the weight of Samuel's condescension still burned. "Better than fine, actually. It's time." For the next hour, I recounted my meeting with Samuel in precise detail, watching my family's expressions darken with each demeaning word I repeated. When I reached his "pretty girls" comment, Uncle Dave slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the laptops jump. "That's the same Samuel I remember," he growled. "Hasn't changed in 30 years. Our attorney, Grace Chin, Franklin's sister, a connection that had proven invaluable, cleared her throat. "With the Westlake Fund's commitment this morning, we now control 49.3% of outstanding shares. Another 2% and we'll have clear majority." "What about the Rodriguez family's hedge fund?" I asked. "They were considering selling their 4% stake." Ryan lowered his phone. "They're in. Just got confirmation. But they want assurances about the company's direction post-transition." "They'll have them," I promised. "This isn't about dismantling what Grandpa built. It's about restoring it." We worked through the night, making final stock purchases through various channels, preparing legal notifications, and scripting the precise sequence of events that would unfold. By dawn, Mitchell family interests officially controlled 53.7% of Freeman Technologies stock, a controlling majority by any measure. Grace drafted a formal letter to CEO William Hastings, notifying him of the change in majority ownership and requesting an emergency board meeting. "We've kept Hastings in the dark until now," she explained. "He's always been Samuel's man, but he's a pragmatist. He'll follow the power." At 9 a.m. Ryan and I personally delivered the letter to Hastings's office. His assistant tried to turn us away, but the words "majority shareholder" worked their magic. Within minutes we were seated across from a very confused Sue. "This must be some kind of mistake," Hastings sputtered, scanning the documentation. "These share acquisitions are all perfectly legal and verified," Grace interjected smoothly. "The Mitchell family now holds controlling interest in Freeman Technologies." "Mitchell?" His eyes widened, darting between our faces. "As in Joseph Mitchell's granddaughter," I confirmed. "Co-founder of what was once Mitchell Freeman Technologies." The blood drained from Hastings's face as comprehension dawned. "You've been working in marketing for 3 years. Learning the company my grandfather built from the ground up," I nodded. "We require a special board meeting tomorrow morning. All members must attend." "Samuel won't like this," Hastings muttered, already calculating where his loyalties should now lie. "Samuel's preferences are no longer the primary concern of this company," I replied evenly. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Full board attendance is non-negotiable." Walking out of the CEO's office felt surreal. After years of careful planning and silent acquisition, we'd finally shown our hand. There was no going back now. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. News of unusual trading activity in Freeman Technologies stock had already caught the attention of financial analysts, though no one yet understood what was happening. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from confused former colleagues, but I maintained radio silence. Tomorrow would provide all the answers they needed. The boardroom was tense when I arrived the next morning, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with my grandfather's watch prominently displayed on my wrist. Grace and Ryan flanked me as we waited in an adjacent conference room while the board assembled. Through the glass partition I could see the confusion on the directors' faces. Samuel arrived last, striding in with the confidence of a man who still believed he controlled the room. "What's this emergency about, Hastings?" he demanded, taking his seat at the head of the table. "The quarterly numbers look fine." Hastings glanced nervously at the door where I waited. "We have an unexpected development regarding company ownership." Samuel frowned. "What are you talking about?" At Hastings's nod, his assistant opened the door. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the boardroom, followed by Grace and Ryan. A collective gasp rose from several board members. Franklin Chen's eyes widened in understanding, a small smile playing at his lips. "What is the meaning of this?" Samuel barked, half rising from his chair. Ms. Walker, this is a board meeting. You're no longer employed here. On the contrary, Grace replied, distributing folders to each board member. Ms. Mitchell, her actual name, is now the company's majority shareholder, representing the Mitchell family interests which control 53.7% of outstanding shares. Mitchell? Someone whispered as recognition rippled through the room. I watched Samuel's face as the implications sank in. First confusion, then disbelief, followed by a dawning horror as he truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time. I saw the moment he recognized my grandfather's eyes staring back at him, the family resemblance he'd been too arrogant to notice before. Impossible, he breathed, hands gripping the table edge. I assure you it's quite possible, Mr. Freeman, I replied, my voice steady. As you so helpfully pointed out yesterday, pretty girls don't need career advancement. Sometimes what they need is justice for their family. The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might faint. You're Joseph's granddaughter, I finished for him. And as of this morning, the controlling shareholder of what was once his company. The boardroom erupted in confused questions and exclamations. Franklin Chin silenced them with a raised hand. I suggest we allow Ms. Mitchell to explain the situation. All eyes turned to me as I took the seat directly opposite Samuel. The power dynamic between us irrevocably shifted. Gentlemen, ladies, I began, it's time for Freeman Technologies to remember its roots and reclaim its future. The special board meeting adjourned after 2 hours of explanations, legal confirmations, and preliminary restructuring plans. Throughout it all, Samuel sat in stunned silence, his empire crumbling before his eyes. As the directors filed out, many pausing to introduce themselves properly to me, I remained seated. Mr. Freeman, I said when we were finally alone, I believe we have unfinished business to discuss. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a single morning. If you're expecting an apology, I expect nothing from you, I interrupted calmly. But I am offering you the courtesy of a private conversation before the public announcements begin. In my office, he muttered, rising unsteadily. The corner office that should have borne my grandfather's name alongside his was a monument to Samuel's ego. Awards, photos with celebrities and politicians, expensive art that spoke more of wealth than taste. I closed the door behind us and removed a worn leather portfolio from my briefcase. Do you recognize this? His eyes narrowed. Should I? It belonged to my grandfather. I carefully extracted yellowed documents, spreading them across his desk. These are the original partnership agreements. Equal ownership. Equal profit sharing. Equal decision-making authority. Samuel's jaw tightened. Ancient history. The revised agreements were a masterpiece of deception, I finished. Shell subsidiaries, hidden clauses triggered by specific market conditions, gradual dilution of my grandfather's ownership while he focused on product development. You executed it brilliantly. It was perfectly legal, he snapped defensively. Was it? I pulled out another document. Photocopies of handwritten notes in Samuel's own writing, detailing ways to mislead my grandfather about contract terms. These suggest otherwise. The blood drained from his face again. Where did you get those? Grandpa kept everything. He knew what you'd done even if he couldn't prove it legally at the time. I leaned forward. He died believing his legacy was lost, that his children and grandchildren would never benefit from what he built. For the first time, a flicker of shame crossed Samuel's face. He quickly masked it with bravado. What do you want? Money? A settlement? Name your price. I laughed softly. You still don't understand. This was never about money. Then what? He demanded. Justice. Truth. Recognition of what was stolen. I stood, looking around the office that symbolized so much pain for my family. But most importantly, restoration of what my grandfather actually valued. His vision for technology that helped people, created by a company that valued integrity. Samuel's expression hardened. So you'll what? Fire me? Humiliate me publicly? Destroy everything I've built for 40 years? The question caught me off guard. During all our planning, I'd focused on obtaining control, not what I'd do with Samuel afterward. Revenge had been my driving force for so long that I'd never fully considered the moral implications of my next steps. In that moment, looking at this diminished man, I realized I stood at a crossroads. I could destroy him as he had destroyed my grandfather. Or I could choose a different path. No, I said finally. I'm not going to destroy you, Samuel. That would make me exactly what you are. Confusion flickered across his face. Then what? You'll resign effective immediately with a fair severance package and your reputation intact. In exchange, you'll acknowledge in private company records the true history of Mitchell Freeman Technologies, including my grandfather's contributions and your creative interpretation of your partnership. And if I refuse? I gathered the incriminating documents. Then the legal team explores every questionable decision you've made over 40 years, with these as a starting point. Your choice. The fight seemed to drain out of him. For a moment, I glimpsed the desperate young man he must have been, brilliant in business but forever in my grandfather's shadow intellectually, choosing deception because he couldn't compete fairly. He was better than me, Samuel said quietly, surprising me. Your grandfather. Always 10 steps ahead technologically. I just wanted some control. So you took it all, I replied, not unkindly. And in doing so you limited what the company could become. Without his innovation you've been treading water for years. He nodded slowly, the admission clearly painful. I'll resign. Your terms. As he drafted his resignation letter, I felt a strange hollowness where my anger had lived for so long. Revenge accomplished wasn't the triumphant feeling I'd imagined. Instead, I felt the weight of responsibility for hundreds of employees and the legacy I'd claimed. The weeks that followed brought sweeping changes. We reinstated the company's original name, Mitchell Freeman Technologies, recognizing both founders' contributions. I appointed Franklin Chin as interim CEO while I learned the operational side of leadership, working closely with him to reshape the company culture. We expanded the R&D department, implementing many of the innovations from my grandfather's journals that Samuel had shelved years ago. We instituted a zero-tolerance policy for workplace discrimination and created clear advancement paths based on merit rather than connections or appearance. Most meaningfully, we established the Joseph Mitchell Foundation for Ethical Innovation, funding scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds with aptitude in technology. 6 months into our transformation, I found myself standing in my grandfather's old study, now preserved as a small museum in our headquarters. My father joined me, studying a framed photo of Grandpa Joe in his workshop. Do you think he would approve? I asked softly. Of how we did this? Of what we're building now? Dad considered the question carefully. The takeover? Maybe not. Your grandfather believed in creating, not taking. He turned to me with a gentle smile. But what you're doing now? Building something better than what existed before? That's exactly what he lived for. I fingered my grandfather's watch, still keeping perfect time. I spent so long focused on reclaiming what was stolen that I never really thought about what came after revenge. And now I'm building something new, I replied, surprised by the genuine passion in my voice. Something that honors the past but isn't constrained by it. As we walked through the R&D department where engineers were developing affordable medical technology for underserved communities, a project directly from my grandfather's journals, I realized the truth. The most important legacy wasn't the company name or stock ownership. It was the vision for technology that improved lives and a corporate culture built on integrity. Samuel had stolen a company, but he could never steal that vision. In reclaiming one, I had rediscovered the other, and found my own purpose beyond revenge. The company was once again Mitchell Freeman Technologies. But more importantly, it was once again a place my grandfather would have been proud of, and so was I.